know that the government has supported it in the past and probably currently, but I guess all of us would probably use a bit more information as to why you don't support it. And given the importance of this issue and the spirit of bipartisanship, it would be possible to make changes to it if there were changes that you would like to make to the legislation. Because we do feel it's very important that there is legislation of this kind on the books leading into these negotiations to show that we're serious internationally. So I'd just love to get your thoughts on.
Sure. Well, there is a definitive Canadian position on the targets going into Copenhagen, and that's what the government has said, which is -20 by 2020 from 2006. That is our position, and that will be our position. The Bill C-311, from my perspective, it is deeply flawed. It proposes targets that are not achievable and not realistic in a Canadian context. And so to suggest that we would take targets that are unrealistic, incorporate them into a law, and then pass the law is not something that we can support. And I think in the last 48 hours, the Liberal Party has come to agree with us and have distanced themselves from the bill. Mr. McGinty actually called it a publicity stunt, and they voted against it in the House on Wednesday. So the concern is that what we're attempting to do as a country is to be responsible in approaching this on an international basis, on a continental basis, and on a domestic basis. Continental is key because our economy is integrated with the United States. We occupy the largest free trading energy marketplace in the world. And so everyone essentially agrees that we need a continentalized approach to this. I've heard very few people disagree with that. All of the premiers say that. Virtually every industry says that, and most of the environmental groups I've talked to agree with that. So taking that as the premise, you can't take a continentalized approach and then superimpose on Canada a unique European target. It will not work. The United States has a target that I've described. If we were to take the target put forward in Bill C-311, which is -25% from 1990, you'd essentially be agreeing to reduce Canada's emissions by 50% from 2006. And people can put that sort of thing in writing, but it's not achievable. It's not practical. It just will not be achieved. Hence, our government is committed to real, concrete, practical, measurable improvements.
But we haven't seen the tools put in place to meet the targets that you stated as looking. There's pretty much consensus among our group and other climate change aware people in Canada that there aren't the tools in place to meet the target that you stated, which is lower than the 311. So that's what we're looking for. Is where's the meat in the sandwich?
Well, we can certainly introduce a bill in the House that deals with the mechanics of it, but that doesn't deal with the central question. The central question is, if we're going to approach this on a continental basis, what kind of an approach is the United States following? Are they going to have a regulatory system, or are they going to have a cap and trade system? If they're going to have a cap and trade system, which is the current approach, what does it look like? And at this point, we have broad brush outlines, but nobody can really answer that question definitively because the bill has only just been introduced into the Senate, and everything I've heard, including from Mr. Podesta this morning, who I think some of you are familiar with, was that it's not likely that the U.S. Senate will pass a bill before Copenhagen.
But I have heard that it's quite likely that there will be a regulatory framework under the EPA put in place if that's not the case, if it doesn't pass through the Senate.
Their backup plan, and they have served notice of this, is the possibility of a regulatory framework.
Is there an answer to that on the Canadian side?
Well, there is. We passed a regulatory framework 2 years ago. It's called Turning the Corner. If that's the road they go down, they have probably a couple of years of work to do to catch up to where we are today. But I don't think they're headed to a regulatory approach. I think they're headed to a cap and trade system. that will emerge from the Senate, sometime in 2010. So that's what we're trying to harmonize against. And come back to your question, which is a fair question. You can't harmonize against, if the United States is approaching this as a reduction of 20% of their carbon emissions from a base of a couple of years ago, as a country, we can't harmonize if our target is a 50% reduction to our emissions. I mean, that just, it's completely untenable in terms of achieving environmental outcomes or advancing the interests of our country. And so that's why we don't support this.
We may not agree on that issue. I think we've seen this report released last year by the Climate Institute outlining the financial implications of attempting a target. And that the modeling states that that's actually quite achievable at a minimum cost to the economy. That's what we've seen. We know it's ambitious, but we can leave it there at that.
Yeah, well, I would only say with you, I've met the premiers across the country. I think by and large the premiers do not agree with that it's achievable, and their preference has been harmonization with the United States at a similar level of ambition, on a similar approach. I think that's essentially what I've heard from most people I talk to across the board.
So we can expect to see an announcement on the Canadian side shortly after there's something firmed up in the U.S. in terms of target.
Well, we've been doing some things in advance of the United States, and we will continue to do that. We approached tailpipe emission standards before they did. We are making progress on our electricity system well ahead of the United States. We are working in concert with them on aviation and marine emissions. But the fundamental architecture of a cap and trade system will require Canada and the United States proceeding at the same time.